The Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia is here, Jason Miyares. Sir, great to have you with us.
Great to be you. Very different than the Attorney General of the United States. That's for darn sure.
And thank goodness. That guy, man. What I don't know if you've been following the Hunter Biden saga in any detail, but if you did, what did you think of this supposed plea deal arrangement last week? Every attorney I've talked to was like, I've never seen such a thing. He was going to be given blanket immunity for literally everything.
Well, it seems to me. Listen, as a former prosecutor myself, listen, you don't go into court not knowing. You will ask for a continuance if things are not hammered out. The fact that the compromise the plea deal cannot withstand even the most basic questioning from the federal judge, and it fell apart literally in front of the world, particularly in a case which was this high profile that was going to receive this level of scrutiny. I found it simply astonishing. And you're exactly right. Most prosecutors, I've not talked to a single prosecutor who thought this was anything other than completely abnormal and unusual, and a huge black eye for the Justice Department, and just shocking.
My suspicion, based on the transcript last week, was that Hunter Biden wasn't clued in on what his attorney had actually negotiated. It was this blanket immunity, but Hunter opened his mouth and says, well, I didn't agree to that deal. And that's when everything fell apart. And it was like, well, it was a total disaster that playing out last week. I don't actually know what happened, but there was definitely some funny business going on because the judge said, we got to tap the brakes here.
Yeah, there's definitely something amiss at the Justice Department on so many different levels. And this one gets people frustrated when they feel like there's a justice system that's not holding both sides accountable on an equal footing, and then they feel like it's not equal protection of the law. That is not healthy for our democracy, I can tell you that.
No, totally dangerous. All right, let's talk about one of the ways that you're confronting the Biden administration. You've joined up with other states' attorneys general to push back on the Biden administration's plan on phasing out gas cars, the internal combustion engine. What details can you give us on this, sir?
Well, I mean, just so you know, this is something the Biden administration does time and time again. They push very controversial far left policy initiatives, and they don't do it through a bill through Congress. They don't do it through legislation. They do it through these unelected administrative bodies, which can pass these regulations that can have the full force of effect of a law, can in many ways impact every aspect of life in America, but there's never a vote on it. And what I like to say is, don't change my life without a vote. And what the Biden administration does is he bypasses Congress. In this case, he is completely changing and reinterpreting different regulations to somehow give the EPA the authority to ban non-electric vehicles. And so what has happened is, as the administrative state has exploded and as Congress increasingly decides not to do their job or do their work, your governors can complain about it, but the only individuals in a position to actually stand up and push back on this federal overreach are your state attorneys general. And that's what we did. We had a coalition of like-minded individuals that essentially want to use the administrative state, and they've done this countless times. Just to remind your listeners, they used OSHA to essentially mandate to employers, private employers, you have to have your employees vaccinated or you are required by federal regulations to fire them. That takes away the employer's choice and mandates this on the employers, would affect tens upon tens of millions of Americans. Not a bill, not something through Congress, regulation through OSHA. We took them to court. We went to the Supreme Court and we won. You've seen this on countless issues, and now they're trying to do it with admission standards and essentially banning all non-EV cars. Takes away consumer choice, and our electric grid can't handle it, and neither do we have the capacity to mine the amount of lithium that is required for these EV cars. So, we are literally at the front line pushing back on the far overreach of the Biden administration.
And this isn't like a small nudge, like, oh, this many parts per million of this exhaust is dangerous to people. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a sweeping overhaul of an entire industry and an entire way of living for Americans across the country. And I feel like the Supreme Court has routinely ruled that you can't do that an agency can't just make up laws that are that sweeping. We had a case called West Virginia versus EPA that was settled in 2022, which smacked back the Biden administration and the EPA and said, no, stay out of this. This is Congress's job.
Right, exactly. And that's time after time after time again. What they do is they bypass Congress. They pass these regulations to the administrative state. You have different state AGs willing to challenge it, take it to court if need be, and eventually we get to the Supreme Court and they strike it down. But this seems to be what they've decided is they want the administrative state to essentially replace Congress and pass rules and regulation in lieu of laws. And think about it. This is why you have a Congress and a Senate. You have committee hearings. You have witnesses testify. You actually have debate and discussion. And for it to get to the president's desk, it requires a pretty broad agreement by both parties. And what happens when you bypass that is that you don't need it. You can use an administrative state to completely bypass the entire democratic process.
Yes.
Again, I don't think that's healthy for our republic or our democracy.
One other piece here on vehicle emission standards. Isn't it the case that the Commonwealth of Virginia is tied to California's emission standards by law? There was an effort, I know, earlier this year for Republicans in the state legislature to get rid of it, but it didn't work. I mean, is there a chance of ever getting rid of this?
Well, just so your listeners know, what happened is in the last 2 years of the Ralph Northam administration, you had this far-left liberal monopoly in Richmond, and they passed a law that tied Virginia's emission standards to an unelected body, an unelected administrative body in California, which essentially was going to ban all EV vehicles in Virginia. And this wasn't going to be a vote. This was going to be a non-accountable body that would be affecting us. I don't know if we need to be emulating California and pretty much anything. They're having a net migration of 200,000 people out of that state because they've regulated, they've taxed, and they've litigated everybody half to death, and they're leaving. So we don't want to emulate California. It is a huge problem. We had a bill that would replace this, get back consumer choice back in the hands of consumers, got out of the Republican state House, died in the far left Democratic state Senate. So if you want to be able to have the consumer choice of not buying an electric vehicle, elections have consequences, and these fall elections are a chance for your voice to be known.
Let me shift gears to another subject, one of your favorite subjects. Loudoun County, Virginia, is the source of so much pain and suffering, unfortunately, at the hands of government officials. And there's been some excellent reporting lately by Nick Minnock. He's just a great reporter over at ABC7, revealing that several of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors members have been essentially stealing from the taxpayers of Loudoun County in order to take well-funded luxury trips all around the planet, flying first class, insisting they deserve it, charging the taxpayers for extra large bags to bring back all of their souvenirs. In fact, here's Phyllis Randall explaining that she's more important than Pete Buttigieg. Listen to this.
Well, I know there's cabinet members who do the same kind of travel more frequently than you do. And they
cabinet
fly.
Members?
Yep, Pete Buttigieg, for example, flies economy. Mm-hmm. He doesn't seem to have a problem, and I don't see him on Polaris business on United.
Well, then that's when the Pete Buttigieg is not the chief elected official of the federal government. I am the chief elected official of the county.
How about that? All right, so when you hear all of that, Attorney General Miyares, is there a point at which too many first-class trips means you're stealing from the taxpayers?
Well, listen, I first of all want to applaud Nick. He is a very good reporter. I do find it a little bit of ironic that the Washington Post, which says democracy dies in the darkness, largely has ignored so many of the stories that have come out of Loudoun in certain areas. And what I've found personally is it used to be that the print journalists were the ones that would do the deepest dives, the biggest investigative reporting would come from print journalism. Now I have not seen that. I've actually seen it's television journalists, actually local television journalists, that are willing to oftentimes report on the stories that the national media or the legacy media won't report on. So kudos to Nick for his dogged work. He is a fantastic investigative journalist. Listen, any investigation of any public official goes through the state police and we work with the state police. And I am not going to, because of that nature, I generally don't speculate or comment on anything of that nature out of respect for the process. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. But I guess I can't even ask you a generic question about this because it would imply the outcome. But my thinking, as I've been watching all of this, is at some point you have to admit this is theft, because their argument is, oh, we'll just change how much we spend, or we'll deal with some of the changes on the edges. But if you're charging $7,400 for a first class trip on United Polaris to and from Ghana, at some point somebody's got to be like, you're stealing. You are stealing money from the taxpayers and then spitting in their face. Julie Briskman. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, listen, I do think that democracy works. I think that's why we needed a vigorous press. And I think this is what happens sometimes, just from an 80,000 feet view, not speaking specifically to Prince William County. But what you have seen is when there is a sense from elected officials that they are invulnerable, they cannot be defeated at the ballot box, then there's sometimes a sense that can occur where they feel like they're invulnerable. And what I would say is everybody who is an elected official needs to be mindful of that. That's the beauty of democracy. The world is run by those that show up. So I would say if the sense of the voters that this has happened in Prince William County, they need their voices to be heard. And I don't know when there's another local election, but if this bothers them, they need to make sure the world is run by those that show up.
Yeah.
The worst thing, I think one of the worst things we have in our society today is a sense of apathy, where people feel like this is just the way the system is and this is the way it's done. No, I think we need to reject apathy. We absolutely need to be able to hold people to high standards, particularly those in all positions of government.
Amen.
So, reject apathy, be involved.
All right. The Attorney General of Virginia, Jason Miyares, thank you as always, sir, for your time. Really appreciate that.